Hello, and welcome back to Prism and Company. On the docket today, the Wild Unknown Tarot, hello, gets the Prism Treatment, Part 3. When I started this Prism Treatment, I knew that I wanted to do a deep dive into a deck and really talk it through. I did not anticipate a three-parter series. Like, this has taken on a bit of a life of its own, almost like a tarot reading in some ways, where you'll lay out the cards, literally in this case the whole deck, and just kind of see what it says to you. And I think that's pretty cool. I'd be really curious to know if this was actually interesting. Is this something you'd like me to do for more tarot decks? Or was this just like too much and who cares? You know, Kim Kranz, you're wonderful, but like, we don't need all this. Anyway, let me know. I'd love to hear. It's been kind of fun. Like, it's been a lot, but it's been fun to just dissect things and really dig in there and root around. All that being said, though, what's on the docket today are the major arcana. We've barely touched on these cards the whole time, and I've been literally talking about this deck for 2 hours. I think the reason for that is that I just love the minor cards. They are so beautiful to me. They're these little tiny slices of life, and I think that they're so underappreciated. And in many ways, this deck made a lot of people pay attention to the minors. Like, sure, in the Wade Smith deck, there are illustrated minors, but something about these were really special. People woke up and said, oh, those aren't the traditional cards. They're really unique and I have to pay attention to them. And each one is its own like beautiful, cool image. So it really takes some diving into and some dissecting to really sort of understand what this deck is doing. Now, that is not to say that the major arcana don't do that. There's plenty of cool stuff to dig into here as well. It's just that I always like to give the underdog a little bit of extra time. And in my case, a little extra time is 2 solid hours of talking, maybe 2.5. What I'm going to do here is actually take a look through the major arcana in pairs. I didn't anticipate to do that until about 20 seconds ago, or maybe like 2 minutes and 20 seconds ago, when I was just rifling through the deck and I noticed, that's kind of a cool pair. That's kind of a cool pair. That's kind of a cool pair. So we're just going to look at pairs all the way down and see where that takes us. Before I start, though, my normal disclaimers. I will be talking through the Wild Unknown Tarot. Some things I'll say are positive, some things I say are negative. Note that this is nothing against Kim Kranz, nothing against anybody who likes this deck. I am simply applying my personal artist's lens to the images, as if we were looking in a mini museum. I want to see what the Wild Unknown Tarot says to us on its own terms. Without trying to read too much into the images, how is this deck trying to communicate? It's really different. It's really unique. Less and less these days as more decks come out, but it was really a trailblazer as it went. And note that, I was going to say that there's some animal violence in this deck, but I don't think, there's a little bit in the major arcana, just a little skosh. So if you have any problems with that, just be aware of it. You probably know that this is a very popular deck. Cool. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, I do want to talk about the deck in pairs, but the Fool and the World, for me, kind of always in a tarot deck, exist outside of the major arcana. The Fool is like the void. It's the zero. It's the circle that wraps around the entire deck. And it's also kind of not the deck at all. It's like this starting point before anything else kicks into place. And I've talked about that more in my How I Read Tarot series, so feel free to check that out if you want to know. And we also have the World, of course, which is the summation of everything. And I love this image of it too. It's almost reflecting that zero of the Fool. Maybe we just will start with this pair. Here we have a little bird jumping off of a branch. And then at the end of it, we have like this cosmic egg that is going to rehatch our bird as it moves through. I think this is a really beautiful pairing. And just image-wise, like, come on now. Look at this bird with these amazing horizontal lines in the background, a subtle gradation from larger to smaller lines, and additionally from colorful to black and white. From a rendering standpoint, beautiful. From an image standpoint, like representing the Fool, beautiful. And then this, almost the exact opposite, these stark blacks with all the color being contained within the shape instead of within the background. We kind of have the Fool and the World replacing each other here, and then these backgrounds almost replacing each other too. We also have a very vertical composition with all the lines in the back as opposed to the horizontal. This is a lovely pairing. And this level of care was really, really thought out in the major arcana. You can, of course, see it in the minors too. Obviously, I spent all that time talking about it, but I think the majors are probably where Kim started, just because you can see all these flashes of inspiration and her trying out new things and stuff that probably carried its way into the minors after the fact. Gorgeous, stunning. Once we're done with the whole shebang, I do want to wrap us up again with these cards, so I won't say too much now. And I don't plan on doing this the whole time, but I'm also going to bring in the Magician here because I think that these two create an interesting little moment. We have the Fool jumping off of this branch with these very static lines in the background, and then the Magician with this super active burst coming out of the back, but still the same color palette. This 0 to 1 transition has been sort of talked to death in tarot esotericism. That idea from going from nothing to something, from inaction to action, from reception to giving. Like there's so many things you can say about a 0 transitioning to a 1. But the way that I visually read these are, we have a Fool jumping off of this branch, and then this is actually looking up. We're seeing an action shot of something falling down and out, and it's that kind of movement of the Fool that causes the Magician to happen here. And obviously there's a different animal and different things, but I imagine the Fool is like up top and it's gonna cruise down right at us. And I love that idea of like almost action, lots of action, super duper cool. But all that being said, I wanna take a look at number 1 and number 2 as a pairing because I think they're really interesting. And then from there, we'll go for 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10. That'll give us all of our pairs except for the Fool in the World, which will bookend us. Let's take a peek. Enter the Magician and the High Priestess, the first in the long line of really lovely pairings in the Wild Unknown Tarot. Here we can see two big cats, obviously different cats, and this pair is looking at each other. And I think that's so darn cool because it's almost as if these two cards are kind of like nodding their head to each other and being like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And just kind of like having a secret kind of bond that we're not aware of until we really kind of dig deep. Compositionally speaking, we have the sun over the Magician. I know I just talked about that as the Fool falling, but I think that's safe to say that is a sunburst up in the corner. And then the moon over here, an opposite with the complete black of the sun and the white of the moon. Kind of a cool juxtaposition anyway, but stylistically speaking, they're inverted. And then a very inverted background where we see a very, very bright background for the Magician and an extremely dark sky for the High Priestess. From the cats themselves, there's not a lot of that inversion happening. We have, a mostly white cat with black markings. Same deal over here. Obviously they're tigers, but big cats is what I'm going for. But another cool inversion are our color palettes. This is a completely warm palette card, so fiery colors, reds, oranges, yellows. And this is one of the extremely rare cool palette cards, so blues, greens, purples. Just so lovely. This communication between these two cards amongst I have like peanut butter in my mouth all of a sudden. Amidst, there we go, all of their opposites is really, really lovely. Even to the point of like, they're almost in the same space. This cat is clearly sitting on essentially a table or the floor where items are placed. And this tiger or this cat is leaning up against something where this crystal ball is placed. So they're in a very similar state, a very similar position, but they're able to have these very different takes. This figure right here is actively holding and wielding these items, where this one's just chill and letting this sort of be. Really, really beautiful. I love this as a pair, and I think it speaks to the sameness of these two cards. There are so many things about the Magician and the High Priestess that are different, but I think this deck implies that something is the same. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. I would say a very, active outwards side and a very thoughtful inward side. And even, taking away our esoteric knowledge that we might have of the tarot, things like a fiery sunburst feels active, where a quiet cold moon feels passive. Holding an object or being on top of an object feels like he's using it or guarding it, where this is not being used at all. That is just letting something be. This is active. This is passive. This cat looks on guard. This cat looks at rest. So neat. I think Kim Kranz is probably also right-handed. I literally have no idea if that's true or not, but it might be a subtle subconscious thing where the active card is looking to the right, the hand that you would often use to draw with, and the passive card is looking to the left. I would be really curious to know if that's true or not, but that is a guess based on these two tarot cards alone. Cool. I'm already loving the pairings here. This is a really strong one, and we'll see more strong ones as we go, but some of them are very obvious and some of them are more subtle, and I look forward to seeing all of them. Let's take a look at 3 and 4. Enter the Empress and the Emperor. I think that this is the pairing that makes most people kind of like wake up and realize, oh, this deck is really doing something different and unique. Here, we don't even have animals. Obviously, we just have trees. And there are a lot of differences between them. We have two very different types of trees. If my mom is watching this right now, she's like screaming at the screen like, this is a balsam fir and that's a white pine. I don't know my trees very well, but she sure does. So you can identify these trees at your leisure, but they're both really beautifully rendered. We also have the interior of this tree being colored, where we have the color on the exterior of the tree with the Emperor. And just like the Magician and the High Priestess, I'm going to put them in their opposite sides, we have the moon and the sun, and the moon is also white and the sun is black. Oh, excuse me, I'm a little burpy tonight. And then we have, of course, the white background and the dark background. So a lot of synergy, if you will, between these two cards and these two cards, but they're opposite because the Magician was first and the High Priestess was second. So it's almost like this little pulse. Kind of interesting that the typically more feminine or the more feminine named cards are darker and that the masculine named cards are brighter. Just not anything, but just kind of interesting. Yes, so let's keep taking a look at compositions. The compositions are extremely similar but opposite. This reflects directly from the Magician and the High Priestess. This is almost more so, though. We have a complete black silhouette and a complete white silhouette, literally with the same footprint on the card. Not so much that she copied and pasted the exact lines, but definitely, referenced these two cards. We have a sun blossoming out. It almost looks like a dark solar eclipse, but I think that's more just a color compositional trick, not trying to imply any sort of cosmic event, where we have this beautiful flowering of the edge of the tree, or almost like the tree kind of fading off into that black space. Now, what does this do compositionally? The Empress draws your attention to the tree because the tree is the white bit with the color. It's trying to draw you in. And I think that's really cool because the Emperor is trying to draw you out. It's trying to draw you towards the environment, to the sun. Our eyes tend to draw towards bright, colorful objects. And, the Emperor is certainly very apparent in the center here, but that sun is really pulling the eye just because it is the only colorful thing on the image by far. And it's that wet watercolor application. So it's also rendered very different. It's the only different application of medium on this page. Super cool. I'm also noticing here we have a triangle shaped tree for the Emperor and a more circular tree for the Empress. And you could even read that as like a 0 and 1, that kind of receptive side and active side. Nice little subtle nods there too. This is a really beautiful pairing. I think my takeaway here is really going to be that focusing inwards, focusing outwards. And I'll have to do some milling with that, like decide exactly what that means for the Empress and the Emperor. For the way that I read tarot cards, that actually sings pretty loud because, the Empress for me is all about like safe space. And that's kind of that, safe, protective, internalized space. And the Emperor is this figure like holding all the pieces together. So it's much more focused on the outside world. So interesting. I just love that. I know this was a a restraint of how she was making the deck with having to write the Emperor in ink. I really would have loved to see that in negative though. White text of the Emperor over black. What an absolute nightmare that would have been to make though. She would have had to have drawn this maybe in pencil or something and then outlined it, filled everything in with pen just perfectly, then erased away the marks. I can 100% appreciate why she did not choose to do that, but just from a pure stylistic composition, I think that would have been very, very cool. Additionally, I also would have liked to see the Empress in cooler tones. I think that there is so much warm in the deck that blues and greens can feature more. But imagine the Empress with a purple haze going into blue, going into green. I think that would have spoken so much to the growth aspect of the Empress with greens and blues, those very earthy colors. And then it would have just been another inversion from the Emperor. Not that I dislike this. This is obviously a beautiful composition. It almost feels like a cherry blossom or something. Not that the tree is that, but just the feel of it. But just it's so inverted that the color theorist in me is like, no, use inverted colors too. But all that aside, I think this is a really, really stunner pair. And I extra love it because all of these cards together, oh, that is a really gorgeous combo. I'll say, going through all the minors in this deck, there's a few that really I don't like. Like this card, for example. I'll kind of talk about some that don't work as successfully for me. And it got me a little bit bummed out. I'm like, do I even like the Wild Unknown? And, that's the kind of thought that flashes through your mind. I do really enjoy this deck, but it's the majors that really make this deck sing for me. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement. Cool. Let's take a look at our next pairing because I think I've said enough about these. Enter the Hierophant and the Lovers. Now, this is a really neat compositional thing that's happening. I keep stacking up these cards, but I keep wanting to bring them in, so I'm just going to leave them out. First, we had two cards facing each other, two big cats. Then we had two neutral cards, and by neutral I mean that the figures were not facing in a particular direction. It was just the Empress and the Emperor as trees. And now we have two birds that are facing away, or I guess three birds, because we have two geese? Yeah, I want to say geese on the Lovers. Birds just left me all of a sudden. So cool, though. And we're kind of back... Colin, quit putting these cards away. We're kind of back to this pairing of the High Priestess and the Magician, but again, kind of inverted with a very dark vertical background for the darker imaged card and a sunburst on the brighter card. But now we have a lightning bolt streaking through with warm tones instead of the cool tones of the crystal ball, and obviously a complete rainbow in the Lovers. The first time that we've seen the full spectrum show up so far in the major arcana. I think that's pretty darn neat. Compositionally speaking, these two are facing away from each other, so they're almost like spreading apart. So I get the idea that, the major arcana in this deck, things start close together. These big ideas are really related. They're even looking at each other. Then we have two figures that are almost standing as gatekeepers. The Empress and the Emperor is this threshold that one might pass through. And now things are starting to diverge. The ideas are becoming more separate. They're almost losing contact with each other. I read the majors backwards. So this would be the idea that, maybe this works better forwards. The idea that cosmic unity starts together, but then as things go, they diverge apart. And I like the idea too that they're birds that are going apart as well. Why did I say it like that? Birds. Because, we have cats that want to stick together, trees that grow next to each other, but birds are migratory. Birds fly away. And even though this Hierophant is firmly affixed to this key, this bird will not stay here forever. He's bound to move on. And then these Lovers are obviously bound to go on as well. Really, really cool, almost like a subtle narrative that's going through. And one that you might miss if you just look at these cards individually, because I think clearly they're meant to be seen in pairs. Two cats, two trees, two birds. And we'll see what that looks like moving forward if those themes really stick true or if they start to go. But at this point, I would expect our themes to diverge because our figures are now moving apart from each other. And I'll be honest, I glanced through the deck, but I didn't do much looking, so it's going to be a kind of a surprise for me too what we find. This is just endlessly cool and fascinating though to me. Like the idea that Kim had enough forethought to really make these neat pairings and even make pairings over multiple cards. Just totally love it. Also, can we talk about this Hierophant for a second? This crow holding this beautiful old skeleton keeps getting struck by lightning. There is something just like moving about this card. This one really, really hits me deep. I love Hierophants anyway. I know a lot of folks have a tough time with them, but this card feels spooky to me in a way that the Hierophant usually doesn't, but I kind of like it. It feels like old and wise, but almost like that wisdom is dangerous. Because again, if we're thinking from a Lovecraftian perspective, knowledge and wisdom are dangerous. Like the more you know, the less you know. It is difficult to have huge scope because then you have all of this information just like coming at you. And once you know something, you can't unknow it. So then you find someone else and fly away into rainbows to ignore it. I don't know. Maybe that's what we're going for here. Really cool. I'm absolutely loving the pairs so far. I think those three are, I would find it hard to find a stronger set within this deck. If there is anything that matches that, I'll be very impressed. But let's move forward to find out if it is true, he said awkwardly. Enter the Chariot and Justice. It's that kind of stuff like at the end of the last one where I'm like, Colin, just cut that. You have editing software, just cut that. And I'm like, nah, I'm just going to leave it in. Here we have the first introduction of our marks on the side, and you'll note that both cards happen to have them. This card in particular is another reason why I think that she drew the majors earlier than the minor arcana, because in no other card with these corner ticks do you see these kind of sub-ticks in the center. I think that's really curious. I think that was just kind of like her being like, oh, the composition is kind of creating these triangles, maybe I'll just work them in. And so she's experimenting with that, decides that it's cool on this card, but she doesn't really like it, then proceeds with each of the minor cards to not include the center ticks, just include the corner ticks like she did with the Chariot. Similarly, these corners are red, which again, I love, but I think that was something that she tried, made the decision that she didn't really like, or wanted to keep maybe specific to a major card, and then proceeded to just do black tick marks in the minor arcana. Very, very cool. Little side note that really always bugs me, why isn't this check mark white? We have, black mark with a black cat, with white opposing it. We have a white cat with black opposing it, but a black check. And I get that that works compositionally around the edge, but that should totally be a little white triangle. I really do think so. I don't think this is one of the strongest cards in the deck. The cats are very lovely, but they're not rendered the best. They're a little bit flat. They're a little bit hard to tell what's going on, especially the white cat. But that all aside, let's take a look at these two as a pair. Besides the corner checks, we obviously have very black and white compositions, the small amounts of red in the Chariot being the outlier here. And we have very linear backgrounds. We have a radial background coming off a now white sun, which is kind of interesting. We've had all black suns up until this point. And then a black moon over here. So we have kind of an inversion of what we've seen on previous cards. Take a look at the Emperor and Empress, for example. We had a black sun and a white moon. Now we have those inverted. And the idea of inversion is also very present in Justice. The cats are being inverted. Their eyes are even being inverted. Why doesn't this cat have a white nose? Come on now. If you're going to invert it, invert everything. Again, that's just the compositional overthinker in me. But I think the idea of these being a conceptual pair and less of a visual pair is neat. This idea of inversion, things that we've already seen in the deck, with just a couple of little kisses of visual overlap between the two. I think I'm going to move on because this card really does bother me a little bit just because of the couple of those teeny tiny things that might have gotten overlooked. But a lovely pair, a lovely cool conceptual idea. Let's see what's next. Enter the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune. Now, at first, when I glanced at these, I didn't see a whole lot of interesting overlap, but there's some pretty cool stuff happening. For example, we have a light source on the top of the hermit, and seriously, how cute is this hermit? It's absolutely adorable. But our light source is on top here, and then the light source is on the bottom of our Wheel of Fortune. Here we see a return of that style of sun from the Chariot, that illuminated sun with the very dark halo around it. But we also have a return of the white moon from the Empress and also the High Priestess. So we're kind of coming full circle here, haha, on our Wheel of Fortune, mixing and matching different elements. And also, come to think of it, we have the stars from the World card kind of making a comeback too. And I guess maybe a foreshadowing to the stars of the world, because this card is way later than the Wheel of Fortune. Lots of cool little stuff being woven into this though. And literally woven into it because it's a bird's nest essentially crisscrossing. We also have very circular compositions. The hermit is obviously not a perfect circle, but it is certainly implying one. And also the glow around this light is certainly implying a circular motif. Then we have a circle here as well with the Wheel of Fortune. And at the center of those circles, we have red going to yellow. So a very kind of like flame burning feeling with both of these. And then some really beautiful rainbows outside of that. Now, I will say, this composition is a little bit messy for me. There's a lot going on visually. We have many different lines kind of colliding with then a lot more lines over the top of it with these branches. But all in all, that kind of messy feeling fits. This is supposed to, I think, feel like a hobbled together nest. Clearly we have things dripping and, just being tied together by literal threads. And that's cool. Not every composition needs to be like a super clean cut thing. A little bit of mess every now and then is really kind of neat. I think it's interesting how many times she includes suns and moons on her card. It's a very specific thing to include many times. Like clearly it's a theme. Clearly it's something that she wants to, have be a little cadence throughout the deck. And I think here, like especially on the Wheel of Fortune, to have both is fantastic. It's the rising of the sun and the setting of it for the moon. But I also love the fact that the sun is now below the earth essentially, and it will eventually rise again to bring another day. I'm kind of curious too. Oh, that's cool. If we look at the Wheel of Fortune next to the world, it's almost like this is the world that is like having been built by these natural sources and like tied together in all these ways, and the sun is orbiting around, and then it's just referencing the world over here with the night sky field. So we're literally looking at the same image in both of these, but this is the very kind of natural, haphazard way that nature exists with cyclical, planetary bodies. And this is the much more structured metaphysical way that we might look at the same world. That's a lovely little pairing. Nice job, Kim. Gold star. Is there anything more that I want to say about these? I actually kind of love that. Really cool little bits. I've officially grown to love this Wheel of Fortune card. I think that is totally stellar. I'm like re-falling in love with this deck again. I just wish the card stock was friggin' better. Okay, I promise not to complain about that anymore. And then the Hermit just being absolutely adorable. Great. Sold, signed, sealed, delivered. We're going to keep talking for a while because why? I don't know. Okay, I'm done now. Enter Strength and the Hanged Man. Just lovely. Now, you can probably see the visual thing happening here immediately. We have dark going to light and light going to dark. We have a bright spot up here and a dark spot down here. Or I should even say like a dark spot up here. The face is bright, but we do have a dark halo and a dark halo. This is a yin-yang. We have, a very cyclical composition between these two things happening, even to the point where we have vertical lines going up the Hanged Man and vertical lines coming down off of the Lion. This card is like rocketing up where this card is lingering and hanging down. And then on the bright side of both of these, we have our warm colors with the red of the eyes of the Hanged Man and someone just commented what this thing is called, lama dama ding dong, probably not that, the infinity symbol on the lion's head, and then a different rendering yet again of the sun in the background. All of these different renderings of the sun are yet another reason why I think that the major arcana was done early. We see a real unification of some of these symbols in the minors, where here we have 4 different renderings of the sun, which is beautiful. I think that kind of visual variety is pretty cool, but it definitely makes for a less cohesive look. The thing that is cohesive, though, is the technique, the application of the watercolor, the use of the pen in the background, the almost like unbelievable attention to like tiny hatch marking detail, to the point where even within the blackness of the hanged man, you can still see the horizontal line of the stick that this bat is hanging off of. I almost said fox. That's a bat. Just so cool, though, that she would take the time to make that a different rendered mark, even though it's dark. She could have easily just had it go off into blackness without worrying about it. But she took the time, which is very, very appreciated. Yeah, I kind of almost want to leave this at that. There's probably more like cool little things that we could talk about. I guess one more that I will touch on is that these are both radial images coming from the same source point. Imagine plucking a point on the card itself and then having beams of light spread away from it. You can do that with both these cards. They are radiating light from the top. So even though they are a yin-yang, they are still maintaining consistency across both of them. Really beautiful, really lovely. This is another pairing that, from Strength to the Hanged Man, I wouldn't necessarily pair up these 2 cards from like a meaning perspective, but they're just like visually speaking, totally beautiful. And I'm really convinced that she is drawing these in pairs, or at least keeping these pairs in mind, because there are so many of these like overlaps. Totally gorgeous. Let's take a peek at the next. Enter Death and Temperance. And I think by this point, everyone's like, I know what's going on. They're birds and they're looking away from each other and it's black and white and it's colorful. Like, I think I've gotten y'all like all ready to see the differences between these 2 cards. And what a beautiful pairing it is. Let's just go over them one by one. Obviously, 2 birds looking away from each other. Dead bird, alive bird. All black and white, completely rainbow. Now, I know this Temperance card actually got a lot more colorful in this version of the deck, and some people were a little bit on it. I think especially considering the pairings, though. Chef's kiss. Beautiful choice, Miss Kranz. But continuing on with the themes, very vertical composition, much more horizontal composition, still very vertical in some ways because we have an arrow pointing with the background specifically, but we do have lines kind of going across instead of just totally up and down. I was just looking here, it almost looked like we had corner checks, but that's just darkness of those lines. So we don't have corner checks, and we do have corner checks over here. And each of the wings almost looks like it is pointing off to the side. I mean, this one is very clearly pointing, but you can kind of imagine the bone structure of this wing moving to the side too. This death card, incredible. I love a dead death card. I love a death card that is spooky and makes you feel haunted, because death is terrifying, and I think it is something that should not be ignored in the tarot deck. I don't think that when you draw the death card, it means you're going to die by any stretch, but I think this is such an important part of the life cycle that when you see death in a reading, you don't focus on the rebirth aspect of it, the inevitability of that. You focus on the death aspect of it. And that is just my personal hot take. Obviously, however you want to read tarot is right for you. But for me, this is where I want to be on a death card. Absolutely stunning and beautiful. Boy, this one almost feels so on the nose that I feel like there's not a lot to talk about it. I do like the fact that these are 2 different kinds of birds. I think that really goes back to, where are my birds now? The Lovers and the Hierophant. I do find this interesting. Many times when we revisit a theme like this, it's inverted. So I might expect to see, let's see. Yeah, well, either way, like the 5, like the Hierophant to be facing to the right, and then the Lovers, the 6 to be facing to the left. Obviously that's not true, but we've had that kind of up and down before, where now you know, these are two very, very similar things. We have nearly black and white compositions facing to the left, very colorful compositions facing to the right. So neat. And I can't exactly tell what kind of bird this is, but it feels like four very different types of birds. And I like the inclusion of different animals in the deck. Very, very neat. Let's see. I think that's pretty good. I don't want to chat too much more about these just because I sort of want to leave them where they are. It's a very obvious composition, almost like the yin-yang of Strength and the Hanged Man. So let's take a look at the next pairing. Enter the Devil and the Tower. This is like such a, like, it's one of my favorite parts of the Major Arcana, to be honest. It's this really heavy symbolism, esotericism, just like human rich section of cards. The idea that we have death and the devil and the tower and also temperance in there. Just big heavy hitters that are still very deep, but also in some ways very, very shallow. Just like you're about to get wrecked, or death is like, you know, something's going to die. Like not physically, but just like, you know, get ready for it. The big intense stuff. And I think it's so cool. But all that being said, let's take a look at the Devil in the Tower here. Some things are very, very similar. Obviously, stark black backgrounds rendered in Miss Kranz's signature hatching style. We have just a totally black border over here on Mr. the Devil and a beautiful inclusion of a colored border on the tower. I also think that she drew the trumps in order, or at least mostly in order, because this is the first time that we've seen this rendering of the edge, this kind of little border with color in it. But then we immediately see it again in, not the next card, but the one after it, the moon. And then, of course, we start to see that more and more through the minor arcana. So that is a motif that she started, picked up on, and then, you know, let it pull throughout the deck, let it be a motif that actually shows up quite a bit. And I'm so glad she did, because I'm an abstract artist at heart, so anything that makes an image feel flatter, I freaking love. So many people, for good reason, want their images to feel like portals, like depth, like it's dragging you into a space. But this image feels so flat. It feels like a shadow box with a cutout of a tree, with a very clearly defined border, extremely flat lightning. I absolutely love it. Love it, love it, love it. Let me say it a few more times. I love it. Besides the outside border, bring it back, Colin, we also have flames coming from the bottom of the Devil and flames coming from the top of the tower. And this is another just curious thing. I'm not trying to talk about symbolism too much, but for me, the tower is about like total, complete annihilation, destruction of a thought or an idea or a situation. But like this tree might make it. You know, it's only getting struck at the very top. It is unfortunately being struck twice at the same time by lightning. But like this part of the tree is totally intact. And that's just a really, really interesting rendering of what that card is. And I'm kind of curious as to what that says about the interpretation, if it does mean something else in this deck. Now, one interesting thing happening here is that we have a very different pairing. You know, it's not two animals. It is an animal and a plant, a tree in this case. And now that I'm thinking about that, where is my other set here? The Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune were the same. We had an animal and then something natural happening. So this is almost a callback to, you know, that bit of composition. And here we even see a nice little up and down of where the light source is coming from, where the heat's coming from in these cards. Man, this is like where there were some things in the minor arcana that I was like, oh, I wish a little more thought went into these. Clearly a lot of thought went into the majors, because you don't get themes and repeat things like that, especially within all of these sets, without planning. Like, I don't care how like intuitive and like go with the flow of an artist you are, that is planning, which is so cool. Like, again, hats off to you, Kim. I think that's a a real compliment to just the amount of love and care that went into these images. Lovely. Really beautiful pairing. I love the starkness of these. I've always loved this tower. I think it's really, really powerful. And again, oh, the flat composition I just love. I can't wait to take a look at the next two and see what they bring. Enter the star and the moon. A lovely pairing if I have ever seen one. I'd like to recite a short poem about the night sky and the celestial bodies within. I don't actually have a poem prepared. It just felt right for the mood. Now, if we're talking about Kim drawing these images, if we look at the tower to the moon, obviously some compositional things were taken, like silhouettes of trees, the outline of the background. But to me, this feels like a stronger image. The trees are rendered a little bit better. This has very heavy foliage, and also some oddities, like there's a big chunk of branches missing when there's no other branches missing, which feels like a real compositional choice to make that impact feel a little bit harder, like it's almost blasting out of this side. These trees look a lot more realistic. There are these chunks of branches missing, but there's lots of ebb and flow. There's, a really interesting back and forth between where the heavy patches of white are on these trees. They just look a little bit more natural. And then the rendering even of the paint on the side. There's a real harsh line where the yellow starts and stops on here, where all of these colors, there's a little bit of it, but they really blend nicely together all the way around. It feels like she had a little more practice for this card than for this card. And again, you heard me gush about this card. I love it, but this one feels like it was rendered better. Just like, again, she got a little more practice in. Looking at these two cards, they do feel similar in lots of ways. We have a colorful celestial object on top. We have a very dark background and something kind of cool happening. We have a dark to light gradient in our background here. Very much of a gradient on this side. Gradient here meaning like a slow transition from one shade to another, black to white. And that same gradient happening over here, but in a much more abstract way. We have all black on top, then this white almost like cracking in like it was a fissure, and then the branches getting wider and wider. So we have more and more white being introduced until it's a total white silhouette at the bottom. So if you were to like blur your eyes out, actually, well, I was gonna blur the image, but whatever, you get the idea. If you were to like blur both of these out, this would look like a gradient and this would look like a gradient, admittedly a little bit sharper, but I think that is kind of a cool little back and forth. Here we again see the stars in the sky, very similar to our world card. And what was our other one? The Wheel of Fortune. Lovely little pockets. All these cards also have rainbows on them, which is very, very nice. Just a cool little visual repetition throughout the major arcana. Both of these cards do have rainbows on them too. We haven't seen a ton of rainbows in the major arcana so far, so to see two side by side is very nice. This feels like a very subtle pairing to me, and one that was maybe even a little less intentional. Looking at the sun coming up, it breaks the mold of these hard. So, maybe not. Maybe these two were meant to be kind of viewed together, and then the sun and Judgment were meant to be seen. We shall see. Lovely though. This star is also like such an iconic card from this deck, that rainbow star just like emanating reverse light, like starting dark and just getting brighter and brighter as it goes. Whoa, what a cool way to view that card. So, a card, the star card is often read as like hope or guidance in some ways. And I love the idea of reverse light. I just kind of said that looking at the image, but the idea that, symbolically, a star gets more powerful the further away it is from you. The sun does not guide you in the same way that a star does, because the sun moves so much. An object that is closer to you relatively is much more unreliable because of its movement. Like the sun obviously rotates in a similar way, but you couldn't navigate by the sun. People have been navigating by the North Star forever though, because to us, it's literally in the same spot in the sky. So because it is so far away in the blackness of Earth, its clarity and its ability to guide gets brighter and brighter, like a sun would, the further away it is. I don't know, personally, I think that's kind of a cool way to look at it. It was probably just a compositional choice to make a nice dark sky, but I think that's great. With that, let's take a look at our next two. Enter the Sun and Judgment. And oh, what a lovely pairing these are. I love a big sun on my sun card, and I don't like creepy naked babies. And this card delivers. You ask, and the Wild Unknown delivers. Let's take a look at some similarities between these. We got birds. We got birds for days. And I'd be kind of curious to see, maybe I'll do this after. Is there a cadence of when birds show up? Because obviously we've had some pairings of birds along the way. Here we have 4 birds, and here we have 1 bird with many, 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 many birds on the bottom. We have a completely black and white image, and here we have a rainbow image, believe it or not. It does look like the sun is all warm tones, but in the corners, I'm not sure if you can tell, we get green, blue, violet, and then purple. It's just lovely. I do like that it is dominated by these fiery, hot, warm colors. Kind of interesting, though, that the sun is not rendered as yellow. It is rendered as red, and that is 100% in kind of subservience to Roy G. Biv, the order of a rainbow, because it starts with red, then it goes to orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So if we wanted to end with purple, we'd have to start with red. If we started with yellow, it would go from yellow to green right away, which would just look very non-sun. So I think she made the correct choice here. Very, very nicely done. Here we have the light source pushing away the birds in the corner, and a bird happens to be the light source here, but it is also kind of pushing away these birds. So sort of symbolically and then very literally, we have that happening. And we don't have the checks on both of them. We have the little checks here, but we have implied checks with the corners of these birds. We definitely visually get the same thing that happens with the corner checks. And here we have an interesting thing for the whole deck. We have these outlines, but they're not filled in with any color. I can't think of another time where we have black and white outlines like that, and I like that that is kind of unique to this card. It actually makes the Sun card feel very distinct from the rest of the deck for me. You know, you can't quite put your finger on it, but it almost looks like additional filigree to the edge, because normally the edge is very, very well defined and it feels solid. For example, the tower. It feels like a hard edge. She even has the corners cut almost as if it was like wood paneling or something, or like a frame, like a literal picture frame on this. Or you have just straight black lines, very solid, very, visually unified, where the core, the center of this is totally hollow and you don't have those corner marks. So it just feels like an extra layer of delicate, decorative filigree. Say that 25 times fast. Again, just really kind of unique for the Sun card. Another reason why I feel like she made the Major Arcana first. She tried it out. She was like, ooh, that's cool, but no thanks. Not going to do it anymore. So neat. I think, seeing all of these pairings like this has been great. And they were very clearly intended as pairings because of how succinctly they go together. What I want to take a look at next, though, is the cadence of birds, how often they show up in the Major Arcana, just to see if there's any rhythm there, or maybe it's a little bit more haphazard. I think either way, it's going to be fascinating. Let's take a look. I zoomed us back out a little bit here so we can take a look at more cards at once. And I want to see where these birds fall. So we have 2 cards here with big cats. We have 2 cards with trees. And then we have a set of birds. I'm going to set those on its side just so we can really clearly see them. Actually, I'm going to do this. We'll do some rows. I had to say rows and columns today at work a lot. And boy, I'm fully aware that rows are like this and columns are like this. But saying those words to people, I just can't get them right. Just totally wild. Let's take a look at the next set. We have 2 cards here. We have 2 cards here. Ooh, I was curious if birds would be number 3, but now we have a set of 3 of them. 3. And then our 4th set is birds. And then we have 2 cards here, 2 cards here, and then birds. So we have a set of 3 pairs, 2 birds, 3 pairs, 1, 2, 3 birds, and then 2 pairs, 1, 2 birds. kind of cool. I think that's a nice way to kind of balance it out. There is not enough pairs. Like we would need literally 4 extra major arcana cards for there to be an even spread of these. So I think it's lovely. Like that cadence feels very specific and purposeful. And I wonder what that says about birds. They're kind of like these pinpoints within the major arcana, these sets that like divide it almost up into chunks of 3. Ooh, maybe we'll take a look at those chunks of 3 too. Like, what does the first chunk, the second chunk, and the third chunk say? Actually, yeah, let's do that one next. Did you see the hesitation in my hands as I did that? And I just spent the past couple minutes reorganizing these again, but that's fine. Sorting cards is like, honestly, one of my very favorite things to do. So let's see, let's go like this. I'm just gonna kind of lay out some cards here. Oh no, those are our birds. So we have our first set of a couple pairs here before we get to birds. And, this is kind of our very masculine and feminine set. We have, we talked about it before, the extremely dark skies with the moons, the bright white compositions with the black suns. These are our opposites. These are our binary cards before we dive into the more muddied world of the rest of the major arcana. Very cool. Let's kind of slide these up just off the screen a bit, because now we have our set of birds, which I'm going to say are transitory, so they could fly off to the side. And these next ones, we have a few more. I guess there is technically a bird there, but I'm not going to count it. It's not dominated by a bird in the composition. That's an outlier. That's another reason that she drew them early. She's like, I don't know about all that. There's our birds, so we'll stop there. What can we say about these cards? Let's see. We have mostly single figures on the card, the obvious exception being justice. I'm not sure if there's something specific to say. Maybe you have like suns and light sources coming from the top. Like I said, I wasn't sure if this would yield any interesting information or not, but just something kind of cool to look at. We do have some interesting pairings like Strength and the Hermit that I'm seeing. This is not unique to this whole set, but like that's a cool pairing of an animal being very proud and open with a light source above its head and an animal hiding away with a light source above his head. That's just a very nice pairing kind of to speak of. Nothing's immediately jumping out at me for this set though. If you guys see something cool in this particular set of cards, I'd love to hear it. Let's take a look and see if the last set happens to yield anything. All right, I'm gonna actually stop doing this. We're gonna put set 1 off to the side here. Set 2 goes off to the side as well. I'll kind of keep them peeking in the corners. Here we again have our transitory migratory birds that are going. And then we have Devil, Tower, Star, and Moon before we get back. And these feel like a very dark set. We have extremely dark backgrounds. I think just the rendering of the Devil and the Star in some ways have a lot of similarities, where these two also feel very similar. And I guess they would go like this. So we have a kind of an opposite thing going to, or a rhythm, I should say. So maybe not a full set of images. Oh, I guess we have the borders kind of going between these as well, but a nice little back and forth. I think that's a cool dark little spot in the deck, visually very dark. We have a very hopeful card with our cool, distant but illuminated star. Very nice. That wasn't particularly fruitful, but it was interesting to see what those pockets of cards between the birds look like. Okay, I'm going to pack all these cards up, and let's finish up with looking at the Fool and the World one more time, and then maybe a little wrap up right towards the end. Enter the Fool and the World. And actually, I'm going to say the World and the Fool because we've gone all the way through the deck, and we're going to come back out the other side, because what is tarot but a big cyclical process? I kind of mentioned it at the start of the show here, but we have the world as kind of this cosmic egg. We even have flowers growing inwards towards light. Whoa, okay, I'm actually just like really kind of taking a look at this card for a second. Let's like break this down. But what I was going to say is like, we have this inward growing like an egg. Here we kind of have the yolk and then things developing along the edge. and then being birthed back into the Fool. But whoa, let's take a peek at this. Because, like, look at all the layers here. We have all these rainbow lines on the outside, almost like all of our experiences from the deck kind of like wrapping in on themselves. Because what I'm seeing here is like almost one of those 3D panorama shots. Then we have what looks like a snake, essentially. It's an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, but it's gotten to the point where it's literally just consumed itself and it is now like this one unity. And then, or that could be like the surface of land, because now we have all these flowers growing in, but they're all growing in at these angles, which gives this card a spin. It gives it a motion. And I think the world should have some motion to it. The world literally spins. And then we have the sun in the sky right at the center of our composition. If we were to unfold this whole package, we then get horizontal lines with a sun above like this 0, and plant life and these flowers down below. It's literally even the same flowers. And who knows, maybe this is the branch which they are laying on. We're just losing some of those scales because it's gone from being this cosmic serpent back to the wood. Oh, just lovely. And then, we're losing some of the colors again because the Fool has lost some experience and is now ready to dive back in and go. What an absolutely lovely set. I actually gave the rest of the majors a little bit of a shuffle here just because I wanted to just kind of get a grab bag at some of the different combinations. But where I might have some problems with the major arcana, oh no, did I reverse some? Oh well. The major arcana so sings to me in this deck, and I think to many, many people, and that's for good reason, because there is a crap ton of thought that was put into it. And that's true of the minors as well. We saw plenty of themes and things. I just think that this deck has, I was about to say fallen victim to, but that's not really right, has just kind of seen some wear and tear based on the amount of versions that have come out. And, Kim Kranz is certainly welcome to release as many versions as she likes. A work of art is often something that's in progress. We just don't often get to buy it in progress. We get the final product, if you will. But here we have a real sense of what it's like to kind of pick up a work as an artist is still working on it. And who knows why she changed some cards. I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons. But these cards have mostly stayed the same. The only one I know of that's changed is Temperance. And for me, that was a kick butt win because right next to the Death card, looking beautiful. Boy, well, regardless if I do this more or not, I had an absolute blast. I'm glad I saved the major arcana for last because that was really special. Looking through each of those cards and kind of seeing all the details. Tons of fun. Like I said, I would absolutely love to know what you guys think. If you've made it this far, you get a gold star. Where's the star card? Here you go. This one's for you. You, the viewer, who's made it all the way through all of this, you get a gold star. And with that, I say, let's let this video series be, and on to the next. Bye-bye.